Good morning, artists. Today we're going to come back to our really cool snake drawing that we did last week, where we drew a snake wrapping around a tree branch. We used this wrapping effect where, the body is either overlapped by the branch or the body overlaps the branch. So it's this really cool effect that makes it look more realistic because things are in front and then they're behind. So it looks very three-dimensional. All right, and we are going to continue making it look more realistic and interesting by adding something that's really important in art called pattern. Now, in terms of pattern, the magic word is really repeat. So a pattern happens when lines repeat over and over again, or a pattern happens when shapes repeat over and over again, or when colors repeat over and over again. Patterns, as I mentioned before, can make things look more realistic. They can also just make things look way more interesting or beautiful as well. And I think in this case with our snake, it's going to make it look more real and more interesting. So I want to show you a couple of examples from a project that I've done with my younger students for years. So you may remember this. We actually created a different snake drawing where we put a different pattern in each spot. So feel free to play around with the patterns that you add here. They don't necessarily need to be just like Mrs. Langlis's. I'm going to demonstrate one way to do it. If you want to do it the way that I'm doing it, great. If you want to get a little bit more creative with your patterns and make them all different or less realistic in terms of the animal, that's fine with me too. I have another one here. This is a little bit crisper of a drawing. It's been sort of half colored, but you can see I did a checkerboard here and this really cool triangle pattern. So you can get really creative with your patterns. Now I'm going to show you today how to use a pattern to make this snake look even more realistic. And you can see that I've already started sketching it here in pencil. So if you think about a snake is actually sort of like one long tube, right? They kind of like wriggle across the floor and move their body in such an interesting way. But really, it's like a long cylinder. Okay, so it's kind of like round. So in order to make this snake look even more round and realistic, I'm going to begin by making a pattern of curving lines. So it's sort of like C's in a way, and I'm going to make it curve. I started here at the head and I just made a curve. And then I came to, a little bit further and I made another curve and another. Now you'll notice that these curves are all facing in the same direction, okay? So they're curving, curving, curving. And I continued that pattern throughout my whole snake. Now, that might be as much pattern as you want to add. And if so, just go ahead and trace it. So drawing it first is always a good idea. That way, if you make any mistakes or want to change something, you are able to, because Sharpie will not erase. I'm going to move that one down because I didn't really like where it was positioned. Sometimes I make changes as I'm tracing. Excuse me. All right, so this is really my initial pattern that I'm going to add to this snake. Oh, I forgot the one right at the head here. And what I had forgot to remind you of too is after you trace, it's always a good idea to come back and just erase any pencil lines that you might see. Oh, and that reminds me, some of you, I got some snakes last week, and some of you all of you did such a great job on drawing your snake, but I wanted to just remind you to go back and make sure that the snake, can be seen over and then under, because I had some people that didn't trace their snake right here, I think because they were afraid, they weren't sure where the lines should go. So go back and look at that and see if it looks right. And make any changes that you need to. All right, so there's my initial pattern. And as I said, you can stop right there and you could start coloring. It's totally up to you. I am going to make another pattern on this just to make it look even more interesting. So I know that snakes typically have kind of a scaly texture to their skin. And so I'm going to add that. So to make scales here, I'm not going to start with Sharpie. Just caught myself there. I'm going to start with pencil. To make scales, and maybe what I'll do is actually show you on a different piece of paper first. Let me grab one. So to make scales, whether you're doing scales on a fish or maybe a mermaid tail, or in this case, a snake, it's basically a bumpy line. Okay, so there's a bumpy line. And then you make another bumpy line over that. So see how that bump ends at the middle of the last row? And then you just keep on adding it over and over and over again, and it creates this really cool scale pattern. Now, of course, that's not the only way to create scales. That's just one way, and it's an easy way that I like to do it. So there's my snake again. All right, so I'm going to come back to the fish scale, or the snake scale pattern in this case, and I'm just going to start making that bumpy line. And then I'm going to come back. And so again, it's just making another pattern on top of the one that we've already done. So now I'm going to keep on going with my scales. And if they don't meet exactly in the middle of each scale below it, it's really not a big deal. So don't feel like you have to be so precise about it. All right, so I'm going to stop there. You would continue that scale pattern, of course, through your whole snake, having it head in that direction. So that's the tricky thing. As you turn this corner, you're going to turn the direction of your scales. So now I'm going vertically with that bumpy line. And continue until I'm all the way down through my snake. And then at the end, let's say that this was all drawn. At the end, I'm going to come back and I'm just going to trace over. Now, the cool thing about this is, because I'm tracing these, it's going to make coloring pretty quick. So what I can do with whatever coloring material I want, whether it's markers or colored pencils, crayons, whatever you have on hand, whatever you'd like to use today, I can just simply color over this because those black lines will still show up. And I will stop right here because I don't want to take all your time watching me color. Now, here's the thing that you have to be careful of. If you're going to stick with this pattern, see that original line right there and how it's kind of disappeared? If you want, now that I'm looking at it, I might even make a wider band of black there so that it really shows kind of like that. Yeah, I like that a little bit better. So what I'm going to do when I add color is I'm also going to make it a color pattern. So I might go, red for the head, and then yellow, red, yellow, and then just repeat it. So it all becomes part of the pattern. I don't have a finished version of this yet, so I'm going to continue to work on it and hopefully post that for you next time. But I do have this one that I've already shown you, and this artist really just used a color pattern here over and over again with stripes, and that's fine too. So again, any variation of what we've talked about is great as long as you are including pattern, because that's one of our goals today in this art project. Okay, so can't wait to see yours all finished, and I can't wait to finish my own. I think I'm going to continue working on this right now. So I hope you all are doing well. Can't wait to see your snakes, and stay tuned for another remote art project next week. Take care.